The Young and the Restless spoilers next to week full. Nick Moomin had been living with the taste of concrete dust and humiliation in his mouth ever since Matt Clark chained him to that chair, turned a camera on his fear, and detonated the Newman image across the internet like a calculated bomb. The seller was behind him now, the ropes cut, the bruises already turning from purple to sickly yellow, but the psychological echo of that captivity clung to him with every breath. He had replayed that video in his mind 1,000 times, imagining how the world had seen him not as the capable son, not as the steady hand of the family, but as a broken man, trembling, caught in someone else's narrative. He felt the weight of his father's rage and his family's panic. The way the Newmans had been forced to circle the wagons while Matt used him as a pawn in a game of digital blackmail and reputational annihilation. That was why, when the opportunity came to get his hands on Matt himself, Nick did not think of protocols, police reports, or press statements. He thought of that chair. He thought of those taunts. He thought of the way Matt had laughed in the darkness, knowing that he had found a way to humiliate a dynasty. And so when Monday came and Matt was finally cornered, something in Nick snapped into a focus so sharp it bordered on reckless. The world would remember the viral clip, fine. But if this day went the way he intended, the world would also remember who ended Matt Clark. Officially, Matt was apprehended. That was the word law enforcement used, the word that echoed faintly in reports and notifications. Nick knew better. It wasn't the cops who got to him. It was Nick himself, cutting around procedure, putting his hands on the man who had turned his trauma into a spectacle. When he dragged Matt toward the car, shoving him into the passenger seat rather than the back like any other criminal, the move looked almost casual from a distance. But underneath, there was nothing casual about it. Nick was not thinking like a victim. He was thinking like someone who wanted to erase the lingering shadow of helplessness. He was thinking like a Newman. The engine came to life, headlights slicing through the winter afternoon, and as they pulled away, there was a moment when the world seemed to contract into a tunnel, just Nick, Matt, and the quiet violence of air rushing past the windows. Matt, of course, did not go quietly. He knew that as long as he was breathing, he still had leverage. He taunted Nick with insinuations, hinting that there were still failsafes in place, still hidden footage, still allies waiting for a signal. Matt understood something fundamental. Fear was a renewable resource in families like the Newmans. You didn't need to win. You just needed to shake them. Nick's grip on the steering wheel tightened with each calculated jab, each smug suggestion that Victor would never see this coming, that the great patriarch wouldn't be able to spin this off, that the Newman fear machine was already in motion whether Nick wanted it or not. In another life, on a different day, Nick might have forced himself to think like his father, cold, strategic, detached. He might have slowed down, called for backup, turned the car around, delivered Matt straight into the arms of the authorities. But he was not detached. He was raw. His body might have left the cellar, but his mind was still down there, staring into the lens of Matt's camera. Somewhere between that cellar and this car, a part of Nick had decided that this wouldn't end in a courtroom. It would end in silence. Unfortunately for him, Matt had no intention of letting that happen. The shift was sudden but not surprising. Matt, who had been studying Nick's every micro-movement since the moment they stepped into the car, waited for the perfect second when emotion overtook discipline, when Nick's attention drifted, just for a moment, into the storm of his own anger. Matt lunged. It wasn't graceful. It was brutal. All elbows and momentum as he slammed his shoulder into Nick's arm, grasping for the steering wheel with a desperate, animal ferocity. The car jerked violently, tires snarling against asphalt as the vehicle swerved. Nick fought back, but the balance of power in the small space shifted as Matt clawed his way partially over him, both of them grappling for control in a confined chaos. Horns blared around them, lights flashed, but neither man registered anything except each other. It took only a heartbeat for the car to become a weapon with no master. The sickening inevitability of it all seemed to stretch time thin. Nick felt the wheel spin under his palms, felt the car veer toward the barrier, and there was a single, cold thought that cut through the struggle. This is exactly what he wants. If I die, he still wins. Then metal screamed against metal. Glass shattered in a glittering explosion, and the world went white in a jagged, concussive roar. While Nick's fate hung in the balance amid twisted steel and fractured momentum, Genoa City spun on in its own storm of complicated loyalties and dangerously entangled hearts. Across town, Phyllis Summers was doing what she did best, pressing on fractures until they split open, sometimes to protect the people she loved, sometimes to punish them, and more often than not, because she could not help herself. She watched Daniel Romo Lodi with a mixture of maternal worrying and barely concealed outrage, sensing the familiar pattern of self-sabotage re-emerging in her son. Daniel had always carried a restlessness inside him, a need to escape his own stillness by running towards something or so complicated. And lately, that something had a name, Tessa Porter. Tessa, who was married. Tessa, who was not free, not legally, not emotionally. Phyllis had been around enough affairs, betrayals, and moral gray zones to know the terrain by heart. But seeing her son walk straight into a situation with a woman already claimed set every protective alarm bell screaming in her head. So she confronted him, not gently, and not with the soft concern of a mother trying to coax a confession, but with the sharp edge of someone who had lived the consequences of bad choices and watched them echo across generations. Phyllis pressed Daniel about what was really going on between him and Tessa, refusing to be soothed by vague phrases or evasive smiles. She knew the signs. The late-night messages, the subtle shift in his tone when her name came up, the defensive humor that appeared every time Mariah's name was mentioned in proximity. She had warned him already to keep his distance that Tessa was a married woman, that the fallout would not be something he could control once it started. That there were always more people hurt than the two who thought they were just following their hearts. But Daniel's eyes had that look. The one that said he had already crossed a line and was now rationalizing his steps after the fact. Phyllis didn't know yet if he would admit the truth, that he and Tessa had slept together on New Year's Eve. When the noise and the champagne and the illusion of fresh starts made every decision feel less consequential than it truly was. She suspected it, though. She felt it like a knot in her stomach. New Year's was supposed to be symbolic a turning of the Pagabit in Genoa City. It was often just a night when people made the kind of mistakes that stained all the pages that came after. Her concern for Daniel didn't stop her from pivoting, almost seamlessly, into her push at Kane Ashby. If Daniel was teetering on the edge of a personal disaster, Kane was hovering at the threshold of potential. And Phyllis had never been able to resist trying to direct a man's evolution when she saw an opening. She teased him, nudged him, flattered and challenged him in equal measure, invoking Aristotle Dumas not as a mere alias, but as a persona she believed Kane could fully embody. To her, Aristotle Dumas wasn't just a pseudonym. It was a creative armor, a way for Kane to step outside the limitations of his history and reinvent himself as someone bolder, smarter, more dangerous in the boardroom. She told him he had the mind for strategic reinvention, that he could turn his battered past into something sharp-edged and powerful. She wanted him to step into that role completely, to stop hesitating, to stop clinging to the man he used to be. But Kane's heart was lodged somewhere else entirely. Just hours earlier, he had kissed Lily Winters, the woman who had always held the best and worst pieces of him with a kind of gentle, grounding steadiness. That kiss had not been reckless or impulsive. It had been heavy with his story years of love, loss, mistakes, forgiveness, and that fragile hope of maybe, someday, finding their way back for good. For Kane, Lily wasn't just an ex or an unresolved chapter. She was the compass he always circled back to, even when he tried to convince himself he was moving on. So when Phyllis pushed him to lean fully into Aristotle Dumas, to let that side of him dominate and drive his next moves, her encouragement clashed violently with the emotional truth pulsing beneath his carefully managed exterior. She saw untapped potential. He felt the ache of loving someone who might finally be ready to trust him again. And in that gap between perception and reality, Kane hesitated. Phyllis's words might echo in his mind, but Lily's kiss still burned hotter. Her faith in him or the tentative flicker of it wielded a different kind of influence than Phyllis's ambition ever could. Meanwhile, in the Abbott mansion, another kind of storm was gathering, one less physical than Nick's car crash and less overtly seductive than Phyllis's maneuvers, but no less dangerous. Diane Jenkins had been watching Jack with an unease that curdled into frustration, then into simmering anger. She understood better than most that loyalty was complicated in this town, that history didn't entangle itself just because people wanted a fresh start. But she was reaching the end of her patience with Jack's unwavering softness where Nikki Newman was concerned. To Diane, Nikki represented everything precarious about Jack's judgment, a blind spot formed from nostalgia, guilt, and the remnants of an emotional bond that never quite dissolved. Victor was the enemy. Victor had used AI to cripple Kane, strip Matt bare, and target Jebo with ruthless precision. Victor had gone too far too many times. How, then, could Jack still extend so much trust, so much emotional benefit of the doubt to Nikki, when Nikki had clearly chosen to tether herself to Victor's ship no matter how many icebergs he steered them toward? Diane told him as much, urging him to stop believing that Nikki would somehow rise above Victor's worst instincts. Stop assuming that she would protect Jack or even remain neutral when push came to shove. Nikki had made her choice, Diane pointed out, and she had chosen Victor. Not once. Repeatedly. The recent hints of Nikki's renewed loyalty to Victor, of her willingness to support actions aimed squarely at Jack and Diane, stung like fresh betrayal. Diane was not interested in being gracious about it. She had fought too hard, rebuilt too much, survived too many near obliterations to sit back and watch Jack gamble their future on the hope that Nikki's conscience would suddenly reassert itself. She wanted him to see clearly, to accept that Nikki could be an emotional relic in his life, but not a strategic asset. If he didn't separate the two, they would pay for that confusion. Their argument, though, never reached the explosive pitch it might have on another day. It hovered in that sharp, brittle space where love and resentment collide but don't quite fracture. Diane's voice rose, Jack's jaw tightened, but the real interruption didn't come from either of them. It came from Kyle, stepping into the room carrying not just the tension of their conflict, but the weight of his own revelation. The expression on his face wiped away the last trace of domestic quarrel. Something else was happening, something bigger than their ongoing dispute over Nikki's place in Jack's heart and strategy. Kyle announced that he had found something new, something they could use against Victor, something that might finally tilt the scales in their favor. In that instant, the air in the Abbott mansion shifted from emotional friction to sharp-edged focus. Diane's anger at Jack's Nikki blindness receded just enough to make room for calculation. Jack's internal conflict about loyalty, guilt, and history was forced to temporarily the background. Whatever Kyle had discovered, it was big enough that he was willing to step between them to share it. And given everything already unfolding in Genoa City, from Matt's dismantled empire to Nick's desperate struggle for control behind the wheel, this new piece of information felt less like a coincidence and more like the next necessary step in a war that had finally begun to expose all its players. As Nick's car lay battered in the aftermath of its crash, as Phyllis hovered precariously between protecting her son and pushing Kane toward a destiny he wasn't sure he wanted, as Diane and Jack stood at a crossroads between personal trust and strategic survival, one thing became increasingly clear. The lines that had once separated personal lives from corporate battles were gone. Every choice was double-edged. Every allegiance was suspect. And every reckless impulse, from Nick's decision to handle Matt alone to Daniel's possible confession about New Year's, to Jack's willingness or refusal to let go of Nikki, had the power to reshape the future of Genoa City in ways none of them were remotely prepared to face. In the shifting battlefield of Genoa City, the war between Jack Abbott and Victor Newman is no longer confined to boardrooms, shell companies, and carefully worded press releases. It has spilled into every corner of their lives, twisting alliances and forcing even the most self-interested players to choose a side. While the headlines scream about Jack's shocking new leverage and the possibility that Victor might finally be cornered, the undercurrents tell an even richer story, enemies finding common ground. old fixers stepping back into the shadows with fresh agendas, and pawns like Matt Clark and Sienna Bacall being repositioned as lethal pieces in a game that now threatens to consume everyone. Against this backdrop, the unexpected reconciliation between Audra Charles and Holden Novak might seem almost like a side note. A quieter subplot unfolding on the edges of Newman and Abbott Chase, but in Genoa City, nothing happens in isolation. Audra and Holden, two people who understand power, image, and survival better than most, choosing to bury the hatchet suggests that yet another independent power center is forming. One that isn't fully beholden to Victor or Jack. Their decision to make peace isn't romantic fluff, it's strategic. They have watched Newman and Jibba weaponize AI, media, and money. They've seen what happens to those caught in the blast radius when titans collide. Standing together, they gain cover, credibility, and options. If Victor falls, they're positioned to step into the vacuum. If he survives, they can still bargain their way into his favor. And if Jack's gambit pays off, they can pivot just as easily toward Abbott territory. Their reconciliation, born out of bruised egos and hard lessons, is really a pact of mutual protection, a reminder that in Genoa City, forgiveness is often less about emotion and more about long-term placement on the board. While Audra and Holden quietly redraw their lines, Nikki Newman is doing something far more dangerous. She is planning with Michael Baldwin. The pairing alone is enough to raise eyebrows. Michael knows where most of the bodies are buried in this town, both literal and metaphorical, and Nikki has been standing at the epicenter of Victor's storm for decades. For her to align with Michael now, in the middle of an AI scandal and a brewing blackmail attempt, suggests that she is no longer content to simply lecture Victor from the sidelines or hope he'll come to his senses. She wants to plan something concrete, something legal adjacent, but not necessarily clean. Maybe she wants insurance in case Jack's allegations blow up and drag the Newmans into criminal court. Maybe she wants a way to control how much of the truth comes out and when, or maybe deep down. She fears that the only way to save Victor this time is to keep him one step ahead of the law he's been taunting for too long. Michael, for his part, is caught in his favorite and most dangerous position, straddling the line between justice and loyalty. He understands how devastating real charges against Victor would be, not just for Newman Enterprises, but for Nikki, for their children, for the entire city's economic stability. He also knows that the law is not blind in Genoa City, it's selective, easily influenced, and sometimes bought. So as he and Nikki begin sketching out strategies, he isn't just preparing to defend Victor. He's preparing to control the battlefield itself. Do they preemptively leak a smaller piece of the scandal to blunt the force of whatever Jack is holding? Do they quietly start dismantling certain AI systems, deleting logs, burying traces that might tie Victor's name clearly to what happened to Matt and Kane? Or do they do something even more audacious, find a way to flip Matt Clark before Jack fully locks him in as a witness? All of this unfolds just as Sienna Bacall is finally granted her freedom, and her release is far more than a personal victory. Sienna has been the silent echo of Matt's crimes, the woman left standing amid the ruin of Mitch Bacall's stolen world. She's tied to the dark room, to the financial shell game Victor played when he used AI to strip Matt of his wealth, and to Noah Newman, who has been gifted what was effectively taken from her partner in a digital raid hidden behind contracts and legalese. Her freedom means she can now speak without the constraints that once muted her. She can choose a side. Does she stand with the Newmans, accepting Victor's generosity and placing the darkroom under Noah's name, turning pain into partnership? Or does she align with the Abbotts, lending her testimony and her outrage to Jack's case, confirming that the ownership trail of the club and the money around it smells like high-tech theft rather than legitimate acquisition? Sienna is uniquely positioned to blow open the narrative around Victor's conduct. As long as she was entangled, her voice was weak. Free, with nothing left to lose, she becomes dangerous, especially if she decides that the only way to honor what was taken is to help destroy the man who took it. And then there's the photo image that sets fandom and the entire town buzzing. Kyle Abbott, Jack Abbott, and Matt Clark standing together at the Newman Ranch. It's not a courtroom, not a neutral coffee house, not some anonymous office. It's Victor's territory, the place he has always treated as a fortress, a symbol of his untouchable status. To see three men on that land and his oldest rival, one the son of that rival, and one a monster Victor thought he had neatly weaponized and dismissed set signals that something seismic is happening. That image doesn't show Victor, but it screams his name. Jack and Kyle did not accidentally end up at the ranch with Matt in tow. This is a staged reckoning. And it confirms the whispers. Jack Abbott is ready to present Victor with an ultimatum so raw that it strips away all the usual layers of politeness, corporate spin, and family excuses. The deal is brutally simple. Either Victor hands over the artificial intelligence program he's been secretly using as a digital wrecking ball, or he faces prison with Matt Clark ready to testify under oath about exactly how Victor weaponized that program to obliterate his assets and hijack the darkroom. For Jack, reaching this point has required compromises that would have horrified him a few years ago. Aligning with someone like Matt is a moral contamination he would never have tolerated in his younger, more idealistic days. Diane knows it. Kyle knows it. Even Jack himself knows it. But as he stands there with Matt and his son on Newman land, he has made his peace with the fact that this war is already dirty. Victor crossed a line when he used AI not just to compete, but to destroy turning men like Kane and Matt into collateral damage for sport. Now Jack is turning Victor's own sins back on him. The presence of Kyle is crucial. He's the one who dug into the code, the one who traced the financial carnage, the one who showed Jack exactly how Victor's AI stripped Matt bare. His involvement sends a message that this isn't just an old grudge match between two patriarchs. It's generational. The Abbotts are not just fighting for survival, they are evolving to fight on Victor's technological battlefield and, for the first time, they may actually hold the superior weapon. Matt, for his part, stands in a uniquely twisted position. On one hand, he is the victim of Victor's AI theft. On the other, he is the architect of his own unforgivable crimes, from kidnappings to digital terrorism. To Victor, he's a cockroach disposable, repulsive, and useful only when contained. To Jack, he is a necessary evil, a witness whose suffering at Victor's hands doesn't erase his monstrosity, but does make his testimony legally potent. Matt's willingness to testify isn't born from conscience, it's born from spite. Victor created a desperate man when he digitally burned Matt's empire to the ground. Now that man is willing to stand in front of a judge and detail every illegal algorithm, every manipulated trade, every stolen asset, if it means dragging Victor down with him. It's poetic in a brutal, Godin-style way. Victor's AI played God with Matt's life, and now Matt is the one holding the match that could set Victor's future on fire. Victor's fury, when he realizes what Jack is attempting, is almost beyond containment. It's not just that Jack has found a way to threaten his freedom, it's that Jack has dared to partner, however temporarily, with someone Victor considers beneath contempt. In Victor's worldview, there is a hierarchy of enemies. Some are worthy opponents, men like Jack, who at least play the game with a certain code. Others, like Matt, are vermin. For Jack to place himself in league with such vermin, even for strategic purposes, feels to Victor like a betrayal of the unspoken rules that have governed their rivalry for decades. It's as if Jack has said, "I am willing to roll in the mud if that's what it takes to finally drag you down." That realization infuriates Victor more than the legal threat itself. He can handle courts. He can handle prosecutors. He can and has handled jail. What shakes him is the sense that the game has changed, that Jack is no longer keeping one foot in moral high ground. If Jack is willing to go this dark, then Victor is facing a version of his rival he has never fully accounted for. Whether Victor yields to Jack's demand or not is another question entirely. Handing over the AA program would be a confession in all but name. It would mean admitting, at least to Jack, that he crossed lines he cannot publicly defend. It would remove from his arsenal the most powerful weapon he has ever wielded, a system capable of destroying competition silently, invisibly. without leaving the kind of evidence humans once reached for. Victor does not surrender power easily, but he is not stupid. He knows that if Jack truly has Matt's cooperation, if Sienna Bacall chooses to corroborate the financial trail, if Kyle's tech team can reproduce the code patterns in court, then a prosecutor could make a very compelling case. The question becomes, does he believe Jack will actually pull the trigger? Does he think Jack, with all his talk of legacy and family and integrity, will really scorch the earth in a way that could hurt both Newman and Jabot? Or does he suspect that this is a bluff, that Jack will blink first when faced with the prospect of dragging both empires through a scandal that could cripple them for years? The wild card in all of this is that Victor has never truly played alone. He has Nikki, now scheming quietly with Michael Baldwin. He has children and allies who understand crisis management and narrative control. He may have his own counter-leverage on Jack, secrets from Abbott history that could muddy any legal proceedings and turn a clean, sharp narrative about AI abuse into a murky. Both sides are guilty disaster that prosecutors hesitate to touch. He might try to undercut Matt, getting to him behind the scenes, threatening him, buying him, or exposing something that discredits him as a witness. He might lean on Sienna's vulnerabilities, offering her security in exchange for silence. And he might weaponize the reconciliation of people like Audra and Holden, using their desire for advantage to spin the story in media and business circles before Jack ever has a chance to truly define it. In the end, the image of Kyle, Jack, and Matt at the ranch is not just a spoiler it's a snapshot of a turning point. It captures a moment where every character's choices are on a knife's edge. Jack is risking his soul to protect his company. Kyle is proving his worth in the most dangerous way possible. Matt is repositioning himself from silent saboteur to star witness, not out of redemption, but revenge. Nikki is plotting with Michael, torn between love for Victor and fear of what his downfall or his unchecked survival might mean. Sienna is free and finally able to decide who she wants to stand with. Audra and Holden are back on the same side, ready to ride whichever wave crests the highest. And Victor Newman, for all his power and experience, is facing the one thing he has always refused to accept, the possibility that this time, the man coming for him is not playing by the old rules, and that the AI weapon he thought made him untouchable might be the very thing that finally puts him within reach.